Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to colleagues, friends, guests in the South End Room at Keele, and also listening in online. My name's Tim Lustig. I'm Director of the Keele Institute for Liberal Arts and Sciences, and it's my very great pleasure this evening to welcome Malik Al-Nasir, for a lecture entitled Lifting the Barriers to Black Academia Through Positive Action and Decolonisation. Briefly, for those of you who may be new to these events, ILAS is a welcoming hub which distills Keele's long commitment to interdisciplinary research and education. And you can find out more about us on the ILAS website, where you can also see videos of our previous Grand Challenges lecture. It's a really rich repository now. So as I said, it's our great pleasure to invite Malik Al-Nasir to deliver this evening's lecture. He's an author, a poet, an academic from Liverpool. His memoir, Letters to Gill, is a compelling account of his childhood experiences in a brutal UK local authority care system, which at 18 left him traumatised, semi-literate, homeless and destitute. A chance meeting with poet and activist Gil Scott-Heron was to prove life-changing, setting him on a different path. And Malik's currently studying for a PhD in history at the University of Cambridge on an ESRC scholarship. He's just been awarded the Sidney Smith Memorial Prize for Outstanding Achievement at St Catherine's College. And when the talk is over, Malik's happy to take some questions at the end of the lecture. And the Q&A session is going to be hosted by my colleague and friend, Dr. Lisa Lau, from the School of Geography, Geology and the Environment. And Lisa is also the Race Equality Charter self-assessment lead. She's led a lot of our work on Decolonise, the curriculum at Keele. And following that Q&A, Malik's also agreed to sign copies of his memoir for those of you who want to buy them. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Malik.
Thank you. Good evening. Can everyone hear me? I'm just wondering if the radio mic is actually working as well. Yeah? Okay, great. So it's wonderful to be here. This is the first time I've ever been in Keele. And I must say it's really remote. In the sense I was literally like getting one pip on my phone as I came in. I managed to get a signal for about 10 minutes and then I realized you've just got to go for EE Wi-Fi. But I'm really happy to be here. It looks like a wonderful campus and I've had a really, really warm welcome. I've had an opportunity this afternoon to meet with some of the students here, some of the postgraduate students who very kindly shared some of their research with me, but also some of their experiences here at the university. And I was quite enthused to understand that as part of the Race Equality Charter that you guys have signed up to, the students get inducted when they come in here as well on issues of inclusivity, which is not something I had at any of the 3 universities I've graduated from so far. In fact, at my alma mater, which was Hope University, it was the complete opposite. It was more like a baptism of fire as a black person and also as a Muslim going into an ecumenical institution that only recently accepted men because it was set up as a women's teacher training college, and then decided that when they became a university that they would also accept non-Christians. So it was run by nuns and monks and so on, and they really didn't like the idea of someone who had been a Muslim who'd converted to Christianity. So I did not receive that inclusive sort of experience at university, but that was one of the many barriers that I faced in my challenge to find a pathway to academia. As a black person born in the UK, I was the product of a mixed family. So my mother is white, she's Welsh, from a little village in North Wales called Dyzeth. And my father was born in 1918 in Demerara in what is present-day Republic of Guyana, which at the time was known as British Guyana, until it got its independence in '66. And my father had a stroke when I was 8 years old. By the time I was 9 years old, I'd been taken into local authority care after the social worker told my mum, you know, why don't you go and find yourself a nice white man and have a proper family and give us these black kids? So this is 1970s Liverpool, very polarized society, very racially charged kind of environment in which I was growing up, in a council estate with 100,000 white families and 4 black families. So I was taken into local authority care, having been expelled from school at the age of 9 for fighting, because my first day at school, they played the story of Little Black Sambo in the jungle with Little Black Mumbo and Little Black Jumbo. Everyone then started calling me a Black Sambo. Fights ensued. It was the headmaster who was playing this. So do the math, I got expelled. Social services, lo and behold, stepped in and decided to take me into local authority care. My reception into Liverpool social services, city council care, was to be locked in solitary confinement at the age of 9 in a room with bars on the windows for 14 days and nights. That was probably the single most traumatic experience of my life, but it was also the beginnings of what would be another 9 years of repression, of exclusion, and of being absolutely persona non grata, being completely off the radar, no key performance indicators, no milestones, none of the normal things that you would expect for the development and evolution of a child through academia. So I missed 18 months of primary education in the care system. Whilst I was in there, they sent us to a place that had a farm. So we were digging trenches, planting potatoes the size of a football field, what they used to call bastard trenching, because it was a bastard to do. You'd dig down like at least a foot, and then you dig along probably about the width of this room, and then you go back the length of a football field. And all the children would, you know, the one group would dig, the other group would plant and fill in over the top of it, and they would grow potatoes and sell the potatoes. They had an orchard with acres and acres of apples, and the children would have to climb the trees and pick the apples, and they made cider and they sold the cider. One time they decided they wanted to build greenhouses, so they brought in, they dug these trenches, or we dug the trenches, and then they filled it in with this hardcore from building sites, like rubble from dumper trucks, and they gave us little hammers, and we had to smash the bricks down into gravel so they could make the foundation. And then they built greenhouses and grew tomatoes and sold the tomatoes. So I was doing this when other children were at school. So as a consequence of that experience, I emerged from that system at the age of 18, semi-literate, because I'd had literally 18 months of secondary education, which failed because they would let me out of the home, put me in a school, having had no exposure to the subjects. I went into the third year, the second year when I was a third year, halfway through the second year, they moved me up a year. I was in subjects, French, I'd never studied French, sciences, I'd never studied sciences. I failed at everything because I didn't have the opportunity to be able to have a normal pathway to education before you even consider the kind of family trauma of being ripped away from your family, locked in solitary confinement and doing hard labor as a child. So I started to make a determination that at some point in my life, I was going to do 2 things. 1, I was going to get out and be free. And 2, I was going to write a book and tell everyone what they did to me. I'm now free, and there's the book. So I kept my promise to my 10-year-old self. But what I realized as well when I came out was, at 18 years of age, I was dumped onto the streets. I was given £100 by social services and told, get on with it. I was dropped in a hostel for homeless black youths in post-riot Toxteth in Liverpool. I had no relationship with my family at that point. Me and my mother couldn't even talk about it because the trauma that had passed between us. There was no way for me to really understand how to address the issues that I had. How then would I go and get a job? What would I put on my CV? A list of institutions that I was in? You know, if I could even list them with my semi-literacy. What would I do? How would I get work? So the only thing that beckoned for me was the streets, a life of crime, or menial manual labor, which I did. Kitchen porter in hotels, scrubbing decks on ships. I went away to sea for 5 years. But I had one chance encounter with an academic, a civil rights activist, and a poet. And he took a shine to me. His name was Gil Scott-Heron. Many of you may have heard The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Famous poem that he wrote is now considered to be the cornerstone of what became hip-hop and rap music as we know, came out in 1971, okay? And Gil had a master's from Johns Hopkins University in the States in English, and he had evolved as a poet. He'd written 2 books by the time he was 21, and he was touring the world on the back of the success of his album. And I'd met him in Liverpool backstage. He took a shine to me, and he decided to take me on the road with his band. And when he realized I couldn't read and write properly, he encouraged me to learn how to read and write through poetry. So I started developing my literary skills. I had no intention to be a poet. That was not part of the deal. I was using it purely as a tool to become literate so that I could do 2 things. 1 was go to college and university, and 2 was to gain the skill sets to be able to go and sue Liverpool City Council for the time I had in care, which I did, and I won after 10 years of litigation. In each of these stages, I faced barriers. My 18-year-old self was a determinant of what would come next. Being able to say you have O-levels at the time, GCSEs today, would enable you to do A-levels. Being able to say you had A-levels would enable you to enter as an undergraduate and do a first degree. Being able to have a first degree above a 2.2 would be able to, well, preferably a 2.1 or above. They would enable you to do a master's. Having a master's would enable you to do a PhD. So there's a pathway here which is predetermined based upon your status at 18. Based upon my status at 18, I should not be now doing a PhD at Cambridge with a full ESRC scholarship. How am I doing that? Okay. And that's the story that you'll find in this book. But what I would like to do for you first is just to open up with a poem that I wrote at the time, not to write a poem or be a poet, but as part of a body of work that evolved during the process of me trying to become literate. And it was all about the concept of power. Who has power? I had no power. I was completely powerless. The state were in loco parentis, or in lieu of the parent. They had taken away my rights as a child. They had taken away my mother's rights as a parent, and the state was now in control of me. They made all decisions, whether I could see my family, whether I couldn't, where I went to school, if I went to school. It was all in the hands of the state. And the state completely and utterly destroyed my childhood. So this poem was about the inability of me to be able to express my feelings to someone in power because I did not know who to talk to. So I wrote the poem as a kind of an open letter to power themselves. Dear Power, can you tell me who's responsible for the economic blight that plagues my hometown? So I've spent half a life asking why the streets run down, where children play corruption, reigns and broken dreams of wall-to-wall in council house and racist school. Mother of youth, naive and true, she stands faceless in unemployment queue. She's low on pharmaceutical dope because you stole her kids, said you'd help her cope. You had all the answers when she signed the sheet. You just bothered the kids till she was back on her feet. But when she came to take them back, oh, we're terribly sorry. You can't do that. The children asked, what have we done? The system says they're overrun. The social workers on commission. You're on the books, kid. There's no remission. The children striving to be free. The system lying dreams of dying mothers crying. The system's thriving. Cast your vote, politicians say. To ghetto youth, they're all the same. He asked, what have they done for me? It's still the same and I'm 23. I try to work. Who'll take me on from the ghetto? My skin is brown. So I move away to where it's at. Will it take your soul if that's all you've got? See, there's always a market for a tender soul from a broken home with a dream that's bold, where they'll make you up like a living doll, then break you down when you discover what's wrong, then groom your mane and comfort your pain with false emotion, exploit your devotion. When they burned you out, your heart's ragged and torn, and you're cursing yourself on the day you were born. They just throw you back to the guts of strife at the end of the day. Hey, it's only your life. So you're back on the streets, but who wants you around? You traded your soul, they say, pound for pound. You're not the same guy you used to be. You're no longer welcome, as you can see. So pack your things, why don't you go? Don't call on people you used to know. So you're back at the start, potential fodder for jail. See, the system's laughing if they make on your bail, because it doesn't really matter if you win or you lose. The solicitor ends, and the barrister too. Then the judge will decide just how long you'll be used, because the wardens make money, the judge does too. And society's protected from the threat that you pose, and the system will thrive as the industry grows in a guise of free enterprise and justice indeed. See, I'm no longer deceived, because I know your power, and I want a reprieve. So that was one of the first poems that I wrote. And what I realized was, after I'd written it, there was a kind of a catharsis that was inherent within it. It enabled me to exercise a whole bunch of demons. I was able to get stuff out of my system and put it down on paper, on the page, and that was empowering, because it meant that it was no longer inside inside me, damaging me internally, emotionally. It was out, it was organized, it was resolved, it was dealt with. I thought, damn, this is good. I'm gonna write a bunch of this stuff because I got loads of stuff going on in here that's damaging me. I need to get it all out. So I started writing and writing and writing. And then I would send it in letters to Gil. So he'd be in the States and he'd receive my letters with the poetry enclosed. And when he'd come over in the UK on tour, I'd go on tour with him and he'd sit on the tour bus and he'd read the poetry and he'd appraise it and he'd be like a teacher marking my work. One person, one caring adult, and put me on a completely different trajectory in life. So what I thought was, as I moved through academia, I thought I really need to do something to try and illustrate to the people within the academy just what these barriers are. And I thought to myself, how do we measure the damage that was done to the populace who went through this school system, this colonized school system, this colonized curriculum? How do we measure the damage that was done to them? And I thought, well, let's look at some studies. So I looked at Leading Roots, who did this study called The Broken Pipeline. Is anyone familiar with that report? Yeah, you familiar with the report? Okay. So Paulette Williams, one of the authors of the report, you'll probably all know Jason Arday, who's another one of the report authors, co-authors. They did a survey of all the UK's universities and they found that there were less than 4 black British male professors, less than 8 black British professors in the UK. And also that only 0.4% of postgraduate funding, despite the fact that they represent 4.2% of the population. So the racism and discrimination was inherent at every level of the system. And when you think that as 4.2% of the population, we don't pay less tax proportionately than everybody else, we pay the same tax as everyone else. And that's taxpayers' money, and it's billions that's distributed through UKRI, whether it's AHRC, ESRC, whichever one of the funding streams that you tap into for higher education. So why was it that there was so few black professors? Why was it that there was so little of that taxpayers' public money being directed towards the development of black academics through the academic pipeline to professorship? And I started to look at some of the factors, the deprivation, disadvantage. That was evident within the Leading Roots report and other reports as well. Rollock did stuff on this. I'd read stuff previously from Stuart Hall and other sociologists about these levels of intersectional disadvantage that had occurred, because you have, if you're in poverty, then you're going to go to the worst schools. If you're in the worst schools, you're going to get the least support. If you have the least support, it's going to reflect in your results. Your results are a determinant of, what university you get into. You find a disproportionate amount of black people outside of the Russell group, particularly the red bricks. You find, obviously high levels of dropout among the black students, and also you find that there is a substantial proportion of the black students who do not progress beyond undergraduate because of the extent of the debt that they're in, because they don't have the financial support, because of the kind of socioeconomic level that many of them are operating within. So these sorts of disadvantages, and then you can take gender and sexuality and all the other things into account as well, which just add to, if you like, this mix of things which would preclude you from being able to get the things that you need in order to progress through a natural, through a normal kind of trajectory through the education system. And I realized that I actually embodied all of them, apart from I'm heterosexual, so, but apart from that, I pretty much, and I'm a man, so the woman, so from a gender point of view, sexuality point of view, that's the only thing. Everything else to do with black, to do with race, to do, all of these things were compounded, and each one of them presented another obstacle to overcome in order to be able to get into the academy. So how did I get in? After the Toxteth riots in 1981, John Moores, namesake of John Moores University, also the owner of Littlewoods Pools. He had the Littlewoods chain store. It was a multi-billion-pound organisation. They had a building in Liverpool with 3,000 employees in. 2 of their employees in that building were black, and they were both receptionists. Okay, but he stepped in after the Toxteth riots and said to the rioters, what do I need to do to stop this riot? Because it's affecting my business. And they said, you need to give us jobs, you need to create opportunities, you need to do something. So he, along with the Liverpool 8 Defence Committee, formed the first Equal Opportunities Department in Britain. And his board at Littlewoods refused to endorse it, so he paid for it out of his own pocket, and he hired 2 local activists, and they set up the department, and they created a program called Entry to Business, and they would take on 4 black kids from Toxteth per year, and they would put them in college, doing a BTEC, business and finance, and then they would give them management training, and then second them to any area of the organisation they wanted to work in. I was fortunate that I was able to get on that program, and they put me through college, and I went and did business and finance, my first year in the BTEC. I got distinction in 4 out of 5 subjects, and that was what got me into university, okay? But I couldn't get into a Russell Group university. I got into Liverpool Hope, which was only just about trying to get the status of a university. It was called Liverpool Institute of Higher Education. It wasn't officially a university at that time. It became a university whilst I was there. So I was coming in at the kind of lowest level of the academy, okay? Not the kind of university of choice for most people. But I managed to get in. I was trying to study subjects that I didn't know anything about: geography, sociology, American studies. I thought American studies, I might get to go on the road with Gil, do a year out in America, wonderful. Geography, I've traveled around the world a little bit, you know, I know a bit about geopolitics. And sociology, I'd really like to know what it is they teach social workers that makes them mess up kids' lives in the way they do. So, you know, and you don't need any qualifications for American studies or sociology. I had a little bit of a problem getting over the geography thing, but after I told him about all the horticulture I've done on the farm and everything, he was like, okay, you might have to swerve the physical geography, but we'll let you in and we'll give you a chance. And I went through university and I got a 2-2. But a 2-2, entering university at 26, when I couldn't read and write properly at 18, my starting point was subterranean. So in order to get to that point, the amount of work that I had to do in that time frame, you know, was beyond what you would expect of a normal person. Most people at that point who had had my start in life would have been written off completely. But I was determined to get the study skills necessary to be able to research my own case and bring a case against Liverpool City Council, which I did. So the recruitment, retention and progression of black professionals and higher education staff, this was another thing that I noticed. When I looked at why are there so few black professors, there were a few things that came out. One of them was the hostility within the academy towards black academics and the amount of things that they had to face that others didn't, what we call the black tax. So the black tax is the things that black people have to do that a white person wouldn't have to do in the same position, okay? So I'm doing a PhD at Cambridge at the moment. I'm also putting a bill through Parliament to change the law. We've just had our first reading of the Access and Participation Bill, presented by Lord Griffiths. It's had its first reading in the House of Lords. It's moving through. I'm currently writing a policy document that will be on positive action and, you know, for the higher education sector, that will go out from Bristol University Press to all of the HEIs across the entire country. And I'm also putting together a consortium of universities and museums to decolonise their archives from the National Library of Scotland to Liverpool museums, working with 4 universities, about 6-7 museums and 2 libraries, so that the slavery and colonialism collections that they have, which are currently 100% analogue, can be digitized so that they can be researched, so that I can conduct research into my own family who were enslaved, so that I can know who I am and where I come from, because it's buried in their archives that I have no access to. This is the black tax. A white academic in my position would just go to university, get a scholarship or her scholarship, and sit down and do their studies and do a PhD. I can't do that. I have to drag all this other stuff with me. I've got to change the law. I've got to create the opportunities that I'm going to fit into. I've got to do the things necessary to get the funding. How did I even get into Cambridge? I turned up at Cambridge because when Gil Scott-Heron died, I wrote a story about my life in The Guardian. They published it over 4 pages, the G2, and it went viral. Cambridge invited me to come and speak. I went, I did a poetry recital for the Faculty of English there. They loved it. And someone came along and said, can I play bass with you? And he played bass. His mother was the librarian. She invited me back in 2017 to come and do something for the School of Latin American Studies. I presented my findings about my slavery research, tracing my ancestry back through slavery in Demerara. I had a room full of anthropologists and historians at Cambridge who'd never heard any of it before. I then found out it was seminal research, and they were like, you need to come and do a PhD, and I need to supervise you. So I said, okay. I made my application to Cambridge. What did they find? Alma mater, hope. Sorry, 2-2, bin. My application was in the bin. I called the supervisor and I said to him, did you find out anything what's happening with your application? He said, let me go and check. And he went down to the administration office. And he said, where's this application? So and so. He said, bin. He literally took my application out of the bin. Okay? And he said, this is seminal research, you need to process this. This was an administrator, this was not an academic. The first cull is a top sheet cull. And they're only looking at your alma mater, and they're looking at your degree and your transcripts, maybe, if you get that far. Okay? And that's the first cull, and that was in the bin. My research proposal wasn't even looked at that point. So once he'd got me past that and I'd got out of the bin, he ripped off the top copy, and then the actual research proposal goes to the academics. When it got to the academics, it was scored so high that not only did I get offered a place, but I was put on the funding list. So if you're on the funding list, it means that any funder can come and say, we want this one, this one, this one, this one, okay? But there's a hierarchy on the funding list too. Because when it goes on the funding list, the top copy goes back on again. And then all the funders get an opportunity to be able to see your alma mater, and then you're back at square one again with your funding. So I got an offer from Cambridge University, or on the 15th of August, my offer was withdrawn. So I'm now sitting down thinking, I've got this far. I'm remortgage my house. That's the only thing I can do. I pulled about 20 together and I was like, I've got to remortgage, that's what I've got to do. And then a friend of mine just said, no, what we'll do is we'll do a crowdfunder. We're going to do a crowdfunder for you. You need to put your story out of your research in the media. So I did an article on the BBC Online, called Searching for My Slave Roots. You can Google it. I suggest you Google it. Searching for My Slave Roots. Okay? It did 1.5 million reads in 24 hours. I had every single publisher in Britain, all the top publishers, knocking on the door, offering me book deals the very next day. I then informed comms at Cambridge, and I haven't even arrived at Cambridge yet, that I will be doing a crowdfunder to raise this money so that I don't lose my offer. They said, give us a week. A week later, I had a full ESR scholarship under widening participation. Cambridge doesn't do widening participation. They don't need to do widening participation. In fact, it represents the opposite of widening participation. It was designed to not widen participation. It was designed to narrow participation down to those people who could meet that very, very slim, narrow criteria. The people who were most privileged. And most of the other Russell Group universities operate on the same basis. I know there's been some changes recently with Oxford and so on, but that is really how it works. That's the old tradition based on how these universities were all set up. And that precluded people like me from getting involved. I had to go and do something extreme to get that notice to be able to do it. Now, I'm the poster child at Cambridge for widening participation. So, needless to say, they threw me out of the group when I actually started, saying, wanted to do stuff about students, and they were like, well, we'll get this out to the students and that. And I'm like, which bit of widening participation is about you getting something out to students? It's actually about enabling and facilitating the students to participate. It's not about you being able to utilize these students to do stuff for the department. Yeah, so I never got invited back to that meeting. But needless to say, I experienced all of these different disadvantages through the process, which resulted in me initiating this whole Barriers to Black Academia initiative. And this comment here, I love this comment, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. You get into the university, you find that the curriculum is, being written based upon pseudosciences that were developed in the 19th century by people who were financing universities in order to be able to, create the narratives about white supremacy, about the genetic inferiority of black people, the rationale that was used to say that black people were further down the evolutionary chain than white people, and that they should be categorized as property, not people, which enabled slavery and all of that to move along. Ergo, rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness did not apply to black people, because a black man in America was only 3/5 man, because of the pseudoscience that was developed from these eugenicists. There's also ecclesiastical arguments that were being made as well, that, we were not of the descendants of Ham and Shem, that we had developed, we went on the boat with Noah, that we'd sort of developed as this subspecies in Africa. And all of these things were being put together by slave traders who were financing these institutions to create those narratives in order to be able to develop the pseudoscience that would underpin what we today call white supremacy. And the decolonization is about unpicking all that, but it can't be unpicked until it actually gets addressed. So we did an online symposia with a series of academics, Professor Afua Cooper from Canada, Naya Bates from Princeton, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles from University of the West Indies, around barriers to black academia, and some of the Michael O'Hajiru from the Commonwealth Institute. And we looked at what the barriers to black academia was, not from secondary sources, but primary information from academics in America, Canada, UK, and the Caribbean, and what they were actually facing themselves through their own career. So it was a very qualitative kind of study. We transcribed all the narratives. You can look at it. It's called Barriers to Black Academia, Centre for the Study of International Slavery, CSIS at University of Liverpool. All the transcripts are there. You can watch the videos and so on. We produced a report out of that, and we took it to the directors of UKRI, presented to them as part of their ED&I consultation, and now ED&I is a pillar. So anyone who's putting in a DTP bid for ESRC or AHRC now, you'll find that ED&I is one of the things that you have to comply with. Last year, there was only a paragraph on it. The year before, there was nothing. So we looked at the themes that emerged from that report, and we looked at creating an opportunity at Bristol University to do a roundtable discussion with policymakers and a barrister around the legislative framework, the policy framework, and what could be done to lift those barriers that were faced. This was the invite for that. We focused on the Higher Education Research Act of 2017, the Equalities Act of 2010, widening participation and the role of the Office for Students, who obviously collate the statistics. We looked at the BAME statistics, which is completely skews entirely the situation for black people, because the BAME statistic includes, for instance, Chinese people, and you've got Chinese and Afro-Caribbean. Many of the Chinese are funded by their governments in full, and they come in large numbers. The Afro-Caribbean groups are in smaller numbers. They're mostly self-funded. But in the BAME statistic, when you aggregate that data, it looks like, BAME is doing well, proportionate to the population. But it's back to that old idea that there's white and then everything else in relation to white. White becomes the normal. White is the standard by which everything else is judged. White becomes central to everything, And that in and of itself is wrong. So what we wanted to do was to amend the Higher Education Research Act to make it compulsory for all HEIs to collate that data. Some do, some don't. It's mandatory for undergraduates through the Office. The Office for Student collates that information through UCAS, but it's not for postgraduates. And when you think of the postgraduate funding mix, 35% of the funding mix is made up by 15% UKRI and 20% comes from universities themselves. And that is being done on the basis of whatever their DTP bids were. And their DTP bids were made as a consequence of the calls that come out from UKRI based on agreement with the universities as what the criteria is going to be for that funding. And that criteria is so exclusive that it precludes most people who suffer these intersectional disadvantages. So what we wanted to do was to get them to collate the data for higher education right across the board, not just for undergraduates, but for postgraduates as well. Make it mandatory for them to do so, and then to disaggregate that data and completely and utterly do away with the term BAME. We also looked at the Equalities Act and the problem with the Equalities Act. So the Equalities Act at the moment allows for positive action but forbids positive discrimination. The problem you have with people putting bids together is that they don't know the difference in many cases between what constitutes positive discrimination and what constitutes positive action. So the inadvertent consequence of this, if that is indeed the case, is that people are now using the Equalities Act to not do diversity. They are taking legal advice and they're saying on the basis of legal advice, if we do this, we'll be discriminating against white people, therefore we're not doing it. So the positive action measures that were put in place to ring fence funds for, the most disadvantaged and the people who had been, most affected, if you like, by racism and discrimination, that legislation that was put in to protect them was now doing the complete opposite, and it was protecting the people who did it to them. So what we're trying to do is to get clarity on that, because at the moment, when the barristers looked at it, and we worked with the clerks in the House of Commons as well, we found that what was going on was that there was so much ambiguity in the terminology that you had to construe the distinction from several different acts. There was no one thing that defined it and said, if you do this, it's legal. If you do that, it's illegal. So we want clarity, and that may be a case of actually just updating the statutory guidance on that, so that people who want to do positive action but do not want to fall foul of positive discrimination can do so. Almost half of all black doctoral students are enrolled part-time, and that's a lot to do, not in every case, but in general, it's a lot to do with the fact that people who are coming from more underprivileged backgrounds are more likely to have to work whilst they're doing their postgraduate. And if they're not funded, as most black people, particularly Afro-Caribbean people, as the statistics demonstrated, are not, the likelihood is after 50 grand of undergraduate debt, the idea of another 10 grand to pay for their masters plus not earning for that whole entire year is a very daunting prospect. And then having, like what I got, a 75 grand conditional offer, to have 75 grand up front at the end of that, again, precludes participation. So this is from 2010, from HESA, 14,000 British professors, only 50 are black professors in post as of December 2009. And black professors for overseas included, the number rose to 75 out of 14,000. 0.4% of all 17,000 odd professors at UK universities. The 6 universities with more than 2 black professors from UK or overseas include just these: Brunel, Nottingham, London Metropole. 94.3% of British professors are white, and 3.7% are Asian. So some 1.2% of all academics, not just professors, are black. So that's all academics. That's when you go across the entire academy and every single aspect of it. And the professors are the least of that 1.2% figure. So my work is looking at what can be done to change that. So we want to change the framework within which HE funding is done. We want to use the statutory framework to disaggregate the data. We want to define widening participation a little bit more, because at the moment, if you do widening participation, you're working with all the protected characteristics of the the Equalities Act. So you could literally say, okay, we're going to do widening participation 5%, and then go off onto a council estate and get white working class single mums, and who've first generation at university, and do all your widening participation. It would never, there's no requirement to do so many from this group, so many from that group, so many from that group. You just do widening participation. You just bring in people who are excluded from wherever. So people are being very selective in terms of who they bring in. And again, black Caribbean, black British are at the very, very bottom of that pile. So the positive action measures that can be taken, recruitment, retention, and progression. In order to be able to do the recruitment, you've got to make the environment an attractive environment. I don't want to go and work in an environment where people hate me because I'm black. I don't want to walk in an environment and everyone walks out the room when I walk in, or the conversation stops when I enter the room, okay? Or the innuendo starts, when we're in the bathroom or something like that. No one wants to be in that kind of environment, but that is the kind of environment that many of us are forced to work in. So a lot can be done there. In terms of retention, if there are prospects for people to move up the chain, they will be more likely to stay. But if you leave this whole glass ceiling thing where you bring black people in as a window dressing and you go, oh, we got a black person, there he is there, or there she is, sitting in the window where everyone can see them, to sort of tick that box off, then it's unlikely that you're ever going to get that retention. Sooner or later, they'll find another way to survive. And the progression, particularly in the academy, can only be done if you've got the funding for your research. If you don't get the funding for your research, there is no progression. You'll stand still. So what have we done? Myself and the people that I'm working with, we've introduced this widening access and participation bill in Parliament. We've produced a policy document for the HE sector, which will go out to Bristol University Press in draft in March. Hopefully it'll be out at the end of this year and distributed to all HEIs across the country. We are developing a positive action doctoral training partnership with the University of Liverpool. I'm working with the Pro-Vice Chancellor there. We're about to submit a Leverhulme bid. Hopefully if we get it, it'll be 15 fully funded PhDs with 3 MPhils. Hopefully the university will match fund that, so we'll be able to expand that. And we're encouraging other institutions to do it as well. The School of Tropical Medicine have just done 2 fully funded PhDs, and Bristol University have just started a framework within which they're going to do the necessary assessment to be able to determine what they need to do to introduce positive action PhDs in the STEM field. Again, that was something that's faced pushback for the positive action, positive discrimination distinction. So as part of that feedback, we're looking for our bill to clarify that. We also made a written submission to the United Nations Working Group of Experts for people of African descent who made their UK visit, which happens every 10 years, last month. And I arranged for them to go to Cambridge, was hosted there with 2 of the Pro-Vice Chancellors, Lord Simon Woolley, who does Operation Black Vote, and a few others, Sunita Elaine, who's the Master of Jesus College. And we addressed them. They're taking their report back to the United Nations, along with our written submission on barriers to black academia, and hopefully it'll be taken on board and published as part of their report, which will be served on the UK government by the OHCHR under their treaty obligations for the elimination of racial discrimination. And all of that I did whilst I'm trying to do my PhD, so I'm a little bit behind with the writing. It's only 80,000 words and a Viva standing between me and the PhD, but it will get done in time. But if I didn't have to do all this, it would have been done by now. And at that point, I'll throw it open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malik. You've taken us on a really incredible journey, and I'm actually quite breathless at the moment. I don't know if you have the same feeling, right? But that was wonderful because I think we are further galvanized in the work we do in Kiel now, in decolonizing the curriculum and our race equality work, because we've just heard direct testimony of the damage that can be done by a colonized system and curriculum. So thank you so much. Now, we're about to throw it open to the floor for Q&A, but I also want to ask before that, because Malik has specifically asked for inclusivity for our online audience, are there any questions that have come in so far? Terrific.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks for an amazing talk, Malik. I've got 2 questions from the online audience, and I'll kind of, because they're similar and they're sort of prompted by your what can be done, and you may have provided some answers in your last slide or 2. Okay. But if I'll run the questions together, if I may, Malik.
Sure.
Okay, so first one, how can we prevent barriers to accessing higher education for care leavers who may not have the grades to get into university? It doesn't seem fair or right that people should be excluded just because they have had poor access to learning in their childhood. Should not come down to chance. And then the second related one, I think, how can we make university more accessible to black students who are economically disadvantaged and not much funding is available at their university? It can be a huge barrier to continuation of their studies.
I mean, those 2 questions, they are interlinked. Definitely for care leavers, and that's obviously not dependent at all on race. Everyone who goes into care is similarly disadvantaged from, the familial point of view, being taken away from their family, being put, under the care of the local authority, going through whatever they go through, regardless of race. Race is an added factor on that, but if you consider that I think it was 62% of the female prison population in this country were in care. And it was particularly prevalent among females, and there was some research that was done by the Brigstow Institute at Bristol University, and they were actually in there just surveying prisoners for an ethnographic research project, and many of the prisoners that they surveyed actually disclosed the levels of abuse that they suffered whilst they were in care, and this was particularly the case with female prisoners, and that changed the course of their lives, which then led them to become in prison. So, you know, there's a lot of work being done by Lem Sissay as well, who's another poet and a dear friend of mine who actually wrote the foreword to my book, around trying to create opportunities for people who are coming out of care, but also to create awareness about the level of disadvantage that people suffer purely because they were in care, regardless of any other factors. And I think one of the things that I would like to see, particularly from government in that sense, is similar to what they did with the jobs. They came up with a thing called the Care Leavers Covenant, where they went out and they got institutions to commit to taking on and mentoring and providing internships for a certain amount of care leavers. So a lot of government bodies have done that and signed up to the Care Leavers Covenant, construction companies and so on. So they're directly, you know, as employers, looking to give opportunities to people who have been in care, regardless of their attainment levels, and then mentoring them to put them on a better trajectory in life than what they might otherwise be on, having had that care experience. So I think that's a really important thing from a pilot point of view, that they could take the learning from that, what they've done with employment, and they could you know, do it with academic institutions as well, to say that this person did not follow a normal academic trajectory. As a consequence of that, their academia has suffered. We will facilitate some sort of a bridging kind of arrangement to help those people to enter into the academy, because I'm here now doing my PhD at Cambridge, I'm writing books, I'm changing laws, I'm doing all of this stuff. My potential and my abilities was never the question. The question was the state of the system. It was the system that was wrong, not me. I'm living proof of that, and I'm one person. You know, Lem Sissay was Chancellor of Manchester University. He went through the same kinds of stuff that I went through. Benjamin Zephaniah has got 12 honorary doctorates and is a professor. He doesn't even have an undergraduate degree. But his books are on the national curriculum. So we've been disadvantaged because of our care experience, but despite that, our potential has been unlocked in other ways. In the case of myself, Benjamin and Lem, it's been through poetry, you know. So I think the government should step up. Things can be done here. It's not that a person gets to 18 and they don't have these things and therefore the rest of their life is just crap, you know, because of that. That shouldn't be the case. It should never be the case. And the second part of the question was?
It's very related, Malik. So how can we make university more? It's an accessibility question, yeah, but more accessible, particularly to black students who
funding,
are economically disadvantaged.
Yeah, so it was the funding aspect. Yeah. So what we're looking at making, as part of our recommendations in the policy documents, is creating a funding bridge for people who are disadvantaged. I mean, when the government, the condems, I think it was, that lifted the fees up to £9,000, you know, they put a lot of people out of the game at that point. I mean, it was bad enough when it was £3,000. You know, by putting it to £9,000, and the universities were saying they were adding value and they were doing a whole range of things to justify that. But that value has all been performance related in terms of the rankings, and the preoccupation of most vice chancellors is where they sit in the global and the domestic rankings. So they're always going to seek the cream of the crop in order to be able to get there, in order to get that ranking, because that's going to be a predeterminant of the funding that they get, the research investments, etc. So you're in a bigger game that has this set of conditions with this kind of top-down kind of pressure at every level, where it's all performance related. So there's not a great deal of room in that for any kind of compassion. That is more driven by, you know, kind of almost market forces, if you like, if you consider, you know, it now to be the academic market. And your life chances are then predetermined by the outcomes of that, if you're able to afford to go into that market and indebt yourself to that extent to be able to get that qualification, which will then determine your life chances when you come out. So there are a number of different variables there that are at play, which all collectively preclude people from being involved. You can take them away in two ways. One, you can change your criteria. You can just change your criteria. And two, you can create funding bridges for these people to come through. You can say, yeah, we're operating as a university. We're making a lot of money. We're rich. We have land holdings. We have investments. We have a whole range of different things. We get research grants, massive research grants. Why can't we make an allocation of funds here for those most disadvantaged to be able to get them through their undergraduate degree without debt? So at least they can contemplate a master's and a PhD. Why don't we take away that thing that makes them having to work two jobs whilst they're at university to be able to get their degree? That results in them getting a 2-2 instead of a first. That then precludes them from doing a master's, that then precludes them from doing a PhD, that then means that we don't have the professors who are then going to write the books and the peer-reviewed journal articles that are going to end up on the curriculum or in the dissertations of the future generations. That's going to decolonize the academy and the curriculum and everything else. Do you see what I mean? All of these things, it's being crafted in a way to make it be what it currently is. It has to be unpicked at every level. And for me, that starts with governments and the institutions themselves. The institutions have a wide discretion in terms of their criteria. They just have to have a will to do something about it, to unlock the potential of people like me.
Thank you so much. And now I'm sure our audience here is also waiting to ask questions. So will you signal, raise your hands, and we'll bring a mic round to you? Terrific. It would be great if you introduce yourself briefly, I think.
Sure. Malik, thank you. My name is Masinor. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology. I've got 3 points to share with you. One is a quick one. I too made a promise to myself around age 10 to sue, not a city, but a government, that of Germany, who at age 10, the best they could do with me was to assign the label of an illegal immigrant child, refugee child. That's another story, and I'm happy to talk about that. I have not yet fulfilled my promise, and I've not, maybe you can work together on that one. I've got a request to make from you before I ask my question. Given that you get these amazing opportunities nowadays as the poster child, maybe one thing you could consider doing is, before you go to any institution, to ask them for the institution to implement one of your positive actions.
We're going to ask every single institution in the country to implement the positive action. We're intending that this policy document will be distributed to every HEI in Britain.
And one that I would like to ask my own institution, given you shared so much personal stuff, one personal request I would have of an institution like Keele is a lot of the BAME academics go on sick leave because of the black tax, because of other pressures, and that the institution should not and ought not to use their medical records of sick note and sick leaves against them when they raise issues of systemic racism and related stuff. So that's a request. My real question is, Malik, how do you engage with a system that doesn't know how to evaluate your trajectory, let alone to value it?
So there's a number of things there to unpack. Thank you. With regard to your refugee status, I was one of the founder directors of Merseyside Refugee Support Network whilst I was doing my first master's at Liverpool University. I did a master's in applied social research. It was an MSc. I never did my thesis because I got engaged in participatory action research when I realized that there was 2,000 refugees in Liverpool who had been put there by Tony Blair, distributing refugees across the country. And he was Labour, obviously. There was a Liberal council in Liverpool, and they refused to sign up to the dispersal programme. So he bypassed them, went to the private sector, and put 2,000 asylum seekers and refugees in 2 tower blocks in Everton. Everton don't even allow Catholics in, let alone Kurds and Muslims and Hindus and so on. Within 500 square metres and there was all kinds of problems. So I was asked to go and do some work with them around helping some of the refugees to get themselves into businesses. And we found so many social problems there. They were being attacked in the community. There was lots of hostility. There was nothing in place for them. They weren't being screened for tropical diseases. There was a whole range of problems there. So I said, look, rather than you guys trying to develop policy for refugees when you don't know the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee, let me employ 7 of these refugees who've got multilingual skills, and let me get them on master's programs, and let me finance their master's programs, and let me direct their research so that they will be fed into policy-making fora. We fed, 2 of them did housing policy for transitional arrangements for asylum seekers who were being thrown out of their house by the National Asylum Support Service. Congratulations, you're now a refugee. Tick, you got 14 days to get out of your house, and being made homeless by the system. And then having to go on these lists, waiting for years for property and having to couch surf with kids and all this kind of stuff. So we went to I went to the Strategic Housing Partnership with the directors of all the housing associations, got them to agree to let 2 of my refugees who had been through a master's program do their thesis work on this, fed that into that policy making forum. We put in a grant for 80 grand for the Housing Corporation, and we developed the Northwest Regional housing policy for transitional arrangements for asylum seekers and refugees. And we got all of the housing associations in Merseyside, including the City Council, to sign up to it, to allocate a specific amount of their properties to people who were in this transitional arrangement, who were caught between these 2 stools, so they wouldn't be made homeless with their children because they had been successful with their asylum claims. So that was one. We did another one with community safety with Merseyside Police. We did another one with the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine with a Somali GP around screening for tropical diseases, and also around the adverse effects of GAT use. GAT was a thing that they chew. It's like an amphetamine, and it was causing mental health problems in the Somali community. So we did all of this stuff. So I ended up raising 150 grand first, then another 80 grand, then getting that match funded by the City Council, setting up this organisation with the Globalisation and Social Exclusion Unit at Liverpool University and Liverpool Hope, who had a campus in Everton where the asylum seekers were, and working as a founding director of Merseyside Refugee Support Network, and establishing a framework where 120 organisations, voluntary sector, business and statutory bodies could all disseminate good practice. And I was doing that as participatory action research while I was doing my master's, at the end of which I was completely and utterly knackered. They all got their dissertations in, they all got their master's degrees, and I went away with a postgraduate diploma, which also stood against me when I applied to Cambridge, because that was in the subject that would have been most relevant to what I went on to do. But I set up this think tank as a pilot project whilst I was doing the master's. Again, it's another thing of the black tax, you know. So I was very interested in those issues, and I did actively work on those issues. In regard to what your institutions can do around the health and well-being of black academics, the black tax again comes into this, because what happens is there's so few black senior academics. When you get one on the department, they're like, oh, let's give them all the black stuff. Oh, we've got a slavery thing over there. Oh, they can do that. Oh, we've got this thing here with ED&I. Oh, they can do that. You wouldn't get a white academic and just give them all the white stuff. So while you get one black academic in there, you've got to pile all the black stuff on top of them. Why can't they get the same treatments as every other academic? So in the end, they get so overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that's being piled on them and the pressure that they're being put under to deliver the black stuff, that, you know, without necessarily the organizational or operational or administrative support that's required to enable that to happen, and they're not getting the facilitation or the funds that they need, then inadvertently they will go off ill. And it's not like, you know, dodgy illness because they're trying to get out of it. This is emotional and mental health damage that's being done to them by the institution because of institutional historic racism. You know, if there were more black academics in the pipeline, they would be able to spread out the black stuff. Why do all the black academics have to do all the black stuff anyway? You know, they might want to do STEM, they might want to do, you know, geopolitics, they might want to do whatever. They might not want to do black stuff. But because they're black, it's automatically directed onto them. And this is another thing that needs to be addressed. And this is why it's important to open up the academic pipeline to get more black people through into the professoriate, so that we can start to address those issues, so it doesn't become a mental health issue for the one black person that happens to get through, who then gets overloaded with all the other stuff. And there was one more thing you had?
I
Well, this was a question I was asked recently, you know, why is it that black people are left to sort out racism when racism was done to us? Do you know what I mean? It's like, would you ask a rape victim to sort out the headspace of the rapist? You know, would you ask, you know, the family of a murder victim to go and sort out the murderer? You know, racism was done to us. It's not my responsibility as a black person who suffers racism to show white people how not to be racist. That's not my role. It shouldn't have to be. It's not my responsibility. You know, if someone has been racist, then that person, or if an entity is structural racism or, you know, institutional racism or whatever, like what's happening at the moment with, you know, the police forces and so on, it's up to those institutions or those individuals to sort themselves out, to recognize the importance of them doing something about it. And the first stage of that is to actually accept and acknowledge its existence. And part of what I'm doing with my research is looking at the historic origins of that in order to be able to, you know, put that on the table so people can understand A, what it is, and B, why they may be subject to it, even unknowingly or unwittingly. But it's not my responsibility to do so, but I find myself having to do it because there's no other way for me to be able to create the space, if you like, to open up these things that need to be done in order to address those issues, and I continue to suffer from it. So it's a dilemma.
Thank you for opening up more angles for Malik to speak on. Are there any further questions from this audience? Terrific.
Thank you. Just now you mentioned something about racism. Actually, I have a different opinion about racism, to be fair. And I think a lot of people might not agree with me, but I'll say it anyhow. I actually think that rather than saying that people are racist or white people and so on, what about if we change the term to making abuse, as in domestic abuse, and trying to categorize on something that maybe deprive the emotions of people to think that they can be racist and get over, because it becomes some kind of honor that they can say, well, I was racist to that guy because it was funny, or they place on the banter. It's not funny to treat people obviously differently, but if he have some kind of legislation to say, well, this kind of abuse is not tolerated in society, maybe there might be some change in people's behavior. But at the same time, that is actually supported by the state, by the government in the US or in the UK or anywhere else, that it's okay to behave like that. And I think it would be difficult to change people's minds or to change their attitude on the terms of racism. I don't know. That's just my opinion, to think that if it comes to under abuse, I think people might think twice about it, just like you talk about rapists and so on.
Well, we have the term racial abuse, and that's a term in law. So, you know, racial abuse is already there in the statute books. And we have legislation, you know. There's the Race Equalities Act 2010. There's the Race Relations Amendment Act of 2000, you know. There was the original Race Relations Act, I think it was 1969 or something. Anyone law might correct me in the background there. It was 1960 something. So the legislation is there. And when the legislation is enforced, it does go some way to changing behaviours. But it's against a barrage of media. And the media are in a position to be able to direct the narrative. I did a poem once called Freedom of Speech. I said, you can think what you want, but they'll program your thoughts with the media hype and the paper you bought. They set the agenda of which you and I talked, and they lay out the pathway upon which we walk. So we think what they want, and we pay for that too. They can do what they want. They just give us the cue, and we jump to the stage and start playing our roles, and our freedom descends through the blackest of holes. They determine the agenda. They put immigration on the agenda. The media decide it's going to be about immigration. Now look at the people who make immigration the agenda. Nigel Farage, commodities broker. Aaron Banks, South African diamond miner. Robert Mercer, Trump financier, who basically made his fortune from developing the algorithm that bought and sold stocks, automatically when it was the most, prime time to do so. And that absolutely and utterly depends on volatility in the markets in order to be able to do it. And he puts Trump in the White House, opens his mouth, volatility, makes fortunes. All these people are making absolute fortunes out of this. And the immigrants are the people who can't do anything about it. They can't say anything about it. They're on a boat on their way over, and they're blamed for the reason we haven't got jobs, and they haven't even arrived yet. These are scapegoating people who have no voice. And this is something that's always been done. So we could look at, dumbing down the terminology or whatever to suit their sensibilities to try and make it more palatable to people who suffer from it. But that's not going to change the reality of what it is. And legislation alone, as you rightfully said, is, although it might correct behaviours for a particular point in time, if it's not in tandem, if you like, with the so-called free press, these guys will continue to create these negative narratives. Nigel Farage was given by Lord Rothermere's Daily Mail the front page of every single edition of the Daily Mail until he got Brexit. And all it was immigrants this and Muslims that and black people this and da-da-da. It was just barrage every day. 5 million viewers every day. You're going to change people's mindsets because the average person is not sitting down there doing the analysis. They're not going to the OECD for the statistics. Okay? They're picking up them narratives. They're doing the thinking for you. They're planting it in your head and going, this is the agenda. Okay? And then they're doing the analysis for you and then they're providing you with the answer, and all you've got to do is just regurgitate it and have a position left, right, or centre in relation to it. That's all, and they'll provide left, right, and centre for you. And the majority of people will spew these things out without thinking about it. They're just regurgitating nonsense, and it doesn't stand up to scrutiny or analysis. But most people will not be that, scrupulous. They will not sit there and do the scrutiny or the analysis. They'll just churn it out. And as long as the masses of people don't really want to think for themselves and are quite happy to sit down passively, allowing someone to dictate the agenda, do the analysis and provide all the answers, they will adopt those answers, and just the status quo will continue regardless of what the law says. The law will just be a stopgap measure to kind of control it or contain it a little bit so it doesn't get too out of hand. Sometimes the law will get totally out of hand. Slavery was legal. They made it legal to rape black people. They made it legal to kill black people. The Zong, case in point, threw 147 black people overboard. When it came up for trial, what did they say? It would be no different if he threw 147 planks of wood overboard because they are his property to dispose of as he chooses. They are not humans, they are property. The case of the Zong came down to property. So you can legislate for anything. There's a maxim in Parliament. The Parliament has the right to make or repeal any law, no matter how abhorrent. No matter how abhorrent. Why is that maxim there? Why could they not make a legal maxim to say Parliament has the right to make or repeal any law, providing it is morally right to do so? They have the discretion to do that if they wish to, but they didn't do that. They said no matter how abhorrent, meaning they can legislate that they can rape you, they can legislate that they can kill you, they can legislate that they can strip you of your citizenship or take away your human rights. They have the power to legislate to do whatever they want to. So all you need is a tyrant in power, and they have the full freedom, within minimal constraints of majorities and votes and so on, to be able to pretty much do whatever the hell they want. And that is the legal framework that we have. So, as much as you can legislate to get people to behave properly, someone else can come and unlegislate that just as easily. So I think it's not about just semantics and keep changing the name of this to the name of that. It's more about looking at the whole structural thing, analysing it properly, and then picking it apart and seeing what can be done to actually resolve those issues at their core. And you can't really do that without the media, because the media is where people take most of their analysis from.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, we would love to continue the Q&A, but I'm so sorry. We are running out of time. Though Malik has very graciously agreed to sign books, so you can take further questions to him later. Tim, would you like to conclude for us?
Thank you very much.
Well, huge thanks to our speaker for a fantastic talk. Your slide said what can be done, and I think the answer, and it's an understatement, is a whole lot more.